The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, has directed distribution companies to establish direct contact with power generation companies, the GenCos, bypassing the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, that's NBET. And this move aims to phase out electricity subsidies and transition to a cost-reflective tariff system. DisCos will now be responsible for fulfilling federal government contracts with GenCos, including costly agreements.
The federal government's subsidy of 1.7 trillion naira to DisCos in 2024 is deemed unsustainable, prompting the transition to a more cost-reflective approach. The new arrangement may lead to increased financial burdens on both DisCos and end users as more customers are excluded from subsidies and tariffs. Joining us is lawyer and executive coordinator, NEPA WAHALA NG, Emeka Ojoko. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. Let's first of all start with, the little details, in this move by the federal government, and what this means for the end user.
Okay. To give a little bit of a background, prior to this time, NBET was a single buyer from the DisCos, from the GenCos, right? When it was established under the now defunct EPS, the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, NBET was set up to act as a middleman between the GenCos and the DisCos on a take or pay basis. Now, take or pay basically means that that NBET guaranteed to the DisCos that a minimum level of power that will be purchased by NBET and then sold to the DisCos, and then when the DisCos pay, NBET will now remit those monies to the GenCos. So it gave a firm financial guarantee, to the GenCos that XYZ amount of power would be paid to them every month. It was on this basis that the GenCos were able to raise funds to finance the bidding of those. Now, with what has happened over time is that while NBET has a take or pay model with the GenCos, with the DisCos, it did take and pay. Take and pay basically means that the DisCos pay for what they can afford, right? There are no guarantees minimum amount of power that each DisCo purchases. So whenever there is a shortfall between the amount of power purchased and paid for by the DisCos and the amount of power purchased and purchased by NBET from the GenCos, then NBET would have to make up that difference. Now, over time, historically, the GenCos, the DisCos have never paid for the full amount of power sold to them by NBET, right? Which has created a situation where there are massive amounts going to billions of dollars that are being owed GenCos over time. So this arrangement now, the federal government wants to put a stop to it. Okay, so under this order that was just made, NBET is going to maintain its contract with about five of the GenCos, and then each GenCo will now go to purchase power on a take and pay basis. Yeah. Take and pay basis means that the DisCos will contract for what they can pay for. There is no minimum guaranteed. So that creates some kind of imbalance, because for the GenCos now, right, their financing model was based on firm offtake agreements. Now, offtake agreements mean that you guarantee that you will pay for this, you will take this minimum amount of power. If you don't take it, you must pay for it. So if the DisCos now want to transit to a take and pay, it now creates a potential liquidity problem for the GenCos. They now have to look for other ways to sell the power that they have available to sell. All right. It means that if it's international customers who can take up that power, if it's single customers who can take up that power, they'll be obliged to sell to them rather than sell to the DisCos who they are not sure can pay for what they can produce.
So I think my question
potentially to you for the end users.
Yes, exactly. Yes. What does this mean for the end user?
Potentially for the end users is this. You may see one, for the DisCos to be able to pay or to meet their invoices for power supplied to them by the GenCos, they will need to increase tariffs, or you will see face decrease of supply to the customers who they cannot be sure will pay for the power. That means that your metered customers will have less and less of supply, while the metered customers will be the ones that the DisCos will focus on supply power. Those are the two immediate effects that we will see from this order that was passed by NERC. Okay,
does this in any way, because I think the argument really is that it creates some level of stability with the whole power electricity value chain. You know, the disruptions that used to exist before, slight confusion here and there, you know, all of that is now going to be, you know, taken away because there's now a direct relationship between the GenCos and DisCos. Is this a, you know, an argument that maybe would be favorable?
If all things were equal on the side of the DisCos, yes. But because of the historical problems the DisCos had with revenue collection, that will not happen, right? The bulk of their customers are unmetered. So before the DisCos can be sure that whatever power that they take from the GenCos, they can pay for it, they need to meter all their customers, or at least a good majority of those customers. If they don't, there will be consistent revenue shortfalls, which they will have to make up from either by way of loans or by increasing the tariffs paid by the customers who they are sure will pay for their power, which are their metered customers, otherwise known as the Band A customers. Yeah. So what you will see as we transit now will be that there is likely to be a tariff increment across the board for all customers. Now, remember that NERC is given the different state governments power to regulate their own markets. The numbers are increasing by the day, whether or not those state governments are actually ready to take over the electricity markets. So you find that the government is also trying to shift their burden for paying for the shortfall in revenue, the subsidies. They're trying to shift it to the states, because the states will be the one to set the tariffs for their own states. And where there is any shortfall between payments made by customers and the DisCos collections, the state governments will be responsible for finding a way to meet that shortfall.
Yeah, it's looking...
So the stability you're talking about, in an ideal situation, yes, but we are not in an ideal situation in Nigeria right now.
I mean, we don't have the ideal situation. So how best, is there any way that we can make the best of what this reality would look like?
The federal government is doing, making some moves along those lines. What we need to do right now is to ensure customers are metered. It's a tall order, but it needs to be done. Now, most of the presidential metering initiative has started out, but it is still a long way from what needs to be done. Okay, 3 million meters is a drop in the bucket. We're talking about, the DisCos tell us about across the board, maybe they have 8 million customers. It's not true. It's not true. We have over 120 million Nigerians in this country and only 8 million on public power supply. It's not true. Their figures are wrong. Meanwhile, the power that's being generated by the GenCos and sent into the system is measured. Okay, it's measured. They know precisely what amount. So when this power moves out and then the returns don't reflect what has been evacuated, who pays for that difference? That's the issue. So we have 8 million customers or 9 or 10 million as they tell us, and maybe 50, 60 million who are actually using that power, and then the revenue that's coming in is only being paid by maybe 2 or 3 million people. That's a major problem in itself. So the government needs to very, very quickly enumerate all customers who are on the grid, meter them, and that's the only way we'll have full metering, that we can have full revenue assurance, and then as the DisCos collections losses reduce, then we will not see an effect on the price of electricity. But as long as their collections losses are as high as they are, then you will find that keep paying exorbitant prices for electricity.
All right. I mean, Nigerians will definitely, ask more questions as time passes. The DisCos and GenCos would have to have proper explanations to the average Nigerian as to why, there's possibly going to be a tariff increase again. I understand that there's so much infrastructure deficit with regards with the DisCos, And that's one of the reasons that we're having these issues. But thank you very much for joining us. We, of course, will continue to x-ray these issues, and we'll have you join us again pretty soon to speak further. Thanks for your time.